Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the SomeWhatSports Podcast. Another week, another beautiful show where our crew comes together to talk the latest news in sports and more, as always. Of course, you hearing my voice means one thing and one thing only. Sadly, our fearless leader, Chris, is unable to join us on this week's episode. But he is out there. He is doing his civic duty. He is a servant to the public. He's a servant to the people this week, and he is doing God's work right now. And so while we miss you, Chris, no, we hold it down like we always do, and of course, always joining us. Well, especially when Chris is out. One of the partners in crimes of our usual trio, Dame. Dame, how we doing here?
I'm doing better than ever because I don't know why. Just breath of fresh air on this podcast today.
Love to hear it. Love to hear it. But of course, no need to fret, ladies and gentlemen, because despite the fact that Chris is not here, we do still have a trio of sports talk masters here. Because with today's topics that we're talking about, I had to bring in a ringer per se. I had to bring in a guy that can round out our rotation. No, we're not talking baseball, despite the the references I'm making. But I'm bringing a guy who I've talked hockey and football with before. This guy knows his stuff. I'm very excited for the people that listen to us to hear our guy, if it is their first time hearing him. But my guy, JB. JB, happy to have you on. It's been way too long, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Yeah, it's been a long time. I think last time we did a show together was like maybe into 2020. Yeah, 2020. Yeah, so it's been like over a year and some change. So yeah, man, long time. Doing
Yeah.
great though.
Oh, I'm good to hear, brother. I'm good to hear it. It's been way too long. It will not be 2 years before the next show. I can promise that. Yeah, just the world is crazy and all that stuff happens. But hey, had to bring you on because kind of you mentioned it before when it came to 2020. We are going to be talking about the 2022 Stanley Cup Playoffs. Happening the last couple days, ladies and gentlemen, per usual. And this is the tagline of the podcast. It is a Thursday. This will be released after Friday or Saturday, and we're going to talk about the kind of our early reactions and how we expect the series to play out to an extent. Then we're going to start with the Stanley Cup playoffs. Then after that, we are going to transition to the NFL draft because, of course, we're going to talk about the NFL draft. We did our mock a couple weeks ago, and if you guys still want to hear us and how right and or wrong we were when it comes to those selections, you still can. But we're going to look back at the draft, answer a couple of questions that are kind of on our mind, now that the draft is fully said and done. And then also, we're going to do the usual. We're going to give our winners and losers. That part I'm excited for because I feel like in this year's draft class it was a very special thing where I think a lot of teams came out really well. But who am I to get into that portion too early? That comes later in the show. For now, let's bring it back to the very beginning. JB, let's get straight into it. The 2022 Stanley Cup Playoffs. They always say playoff hockey is a different breed of hockey. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and dang it, man, it's only a couple games in so far, but I think we are in for a treat right now, JB, with how the playoffs have been shaken up early. We're going to go through each series and just give our quick takes and thoughts and analysis about it. And I say, JB, let's start out with the East here, and I think we got to start out with, to me, my money could be the most interesting series of this whole first round. Tampa Bay and Toronto. The two teams have already played 2 games so far. It is split 1-1 to this point. JB, I'm going to throw it right to you. From what you've seen what are your thoughts on this series after the first 2 games that we've gotten to take a look at?
Oh man, well, Jurg, man, these series they become games within games sometimes. Like the first game, Toronto just mauled Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay looked flat, they looked tired. But then last night, Tampa looked like the team that I'm accustomed to seeing, the team that's, won back to back Stanley Cups. So the series is about what I expected it to be. After 2 games, I would have told most people I thought it would be 1-1. I didn't think any team was going to be up 2-0 after the second game. But I've been really impressed with just with like Tampa's resolve. Like one thing that I always like about champions is that they might play a really bad game, but they always get their act together the next game. So I've been really impressed with how Tampa was able to bounce back. And Tampa pretty much dominated the last game, except for a couple of rookie goals in the third period. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you mentioned it there, Tampa Bay. They are the back-to-back defending Stanley Cup champions. And you talk about them bouncing back, man. They are 15-0 following a playoff loss over the last, now 3 postseasons, technically 2020, 2021, and now 2022. Like this team just knows how to bounce back from losses, especially when you got that guy, Andrei Vasilevsky, and that it completely shifts things. I think to me, the most interesting part of the series was really the difference between game 1 to game 2. and how you saw, like, one thing that Toronto, I think, makes them a legitimate challenge to Tampa Bay in the series is just the special teams factor. I think for the most part, entering series, JB, the last couple of years, Tampa Bay, you could say they have a special teams advantage. In this series, like power play and penalty kill, you could actually argue Toronto is at their level, and it can even surpass them.
Yeah. No, most definitely. I think that, Tampa Bay, when there's a price of winning, and unfortunately, Tampa Bay lost a couple of big pieces that people really don't think about, like the Blake Coleman, he goes to Calgary Flames. Barclay Goodrow, he goes to the Rangers. So they had to replace these guys. And Barclay Goodrow and Blake Coleman are excellent penalty killers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you account for that. They've done a good job so far. And we really saw Toronto, I really think for Toronto in that game one, the big thing was that they killed the 5-man
In a
penalty,
major.
the 5-minute major that they had to serve. And then they scored on the 5-on-3 power play. I forget, I think it was the second goal of the game that Austin Matthews ripped. Like, as soon as they had that, that whole sequence of events, I think it really gave them the momentum. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that series continues to shape up. I mean, such big stars on both sides, JB, offensively. I think ultimately what it's going to come down to in that series is just whose goalie can match up, between Jack Campbell and Andrei Vasilevsky.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. My original prediction was Tampa in six, because I just trust Vasilevsky more than I trust Campbell. And another thing that I think is really interesting, when the going gets tough, are you going to see these guys from Toronto fold? Like, whenever it seems like whenever they seem like they're in control of something, that's when things go bad. So, like, it's gonna be really interesting to see what Matthews and Marner and Nylander, what these guys can do if they're put in a situation where they have to win a game seven at home. People are talking about how important home ice is. Like, they didn't win last year. I know that there were fans not there. There were only maybe like about like 1,000 fans in attendance last year, but maybe that was to their advantage. Sometimes having a sold out arena can play to your disadvantage. It can make you more nervous, actually. So
Right, right, and also it's funny you mention that because for the first two rounds, Tampa didn't have the home ice advantage at all because I believe Florida had the advantage in round one against them, and then Carolina had the advantage in round
yep.
two.
And they
So
won, and they won both of the games. They won. They were up 2-0. They went up 2-0 against Florida, and they went up 2-0 against Carolina. So yeah.
yeah, outstanding. So the defending champs proving that monarchy. Really going to be interesting to see what happens. I think Game 3 is going to be the big decider, especially result wise in that series. But JB, I mean, you talked about home ice advantage. Let's stay in the state of Florida when we talk about home ice, and let's go to the Florida Panthers. They President's Trophy winners this season, the greatest regular season in franchise history, greatest team that franchise has ever put out on paper, I think. But they lose Game 1 against the Washington Capitals. So I think the simplest question here to really talk about the series, JB, are you concerned, or do you have any real concerns about the Panthers, or do you just think it was game one? Maybe they were a little bit too juiced up for it, and they just let it get to themselves in that opening game.
Not concerned yet, but I think this is a really intriguing series when you look at the fact that, like, I don't trust either team's goaltending. I don't. I think Washington has issues with goaltending, and I think Florida does. Sergei Brovsky has not been the same guy he was in the 2019 playoffs. He's actually been a very bad contract for Florida. I do think Florida will play a little better, and I think that they're not going to score two goals again in the series. I think that they'll score. I don't trust Bobrovsky, and I think you mentioned they haven't won a playoff series since 1996. They made the finals in '96. They have not won a playoff series since then. This is the best team that they've ever had in their history. This would be the ramifications of them losing the series would be huge.
Oh, absolutely, and it would only add on to the President's Trophy curse that people have really brought about here. Since the turn of the century, I think only two teams since actually no, not the turn of the century, since the lockout back in the mid 2000s, only two teams that won the President's Trophy ended up winning the Stanley Cup that same season. That was the '08 Red Wings and the 2013 Blackhawks, and those were essentially two teams that had it from start to finish the entire season. So really interesting to see what Florida's chances are in this. I'm definitely with you. I think ultimately Florida is going to overcome this. This is a team that they scored 6 or more goals more times than they were held under like 2 goals this season. So I think the Florida Panthers, they're too dynamic of a team to let they get to them. And I also think, you mentioned goaltending. I'm definitely with you. I think Bobrovsky, I think he's going to be the ultimate X factor when it comes to the series finishing out. But I think early on, like the Panthers can take advantage of the fact that Vitek Vanacek, he's a good goalie, but like he's not worlds above anyone. Like a lot of people forget he was taken actually from the Capitals. They had to trade back for him back at the expansion draft. So it's a funny sequence of events there. So I think ultimately the series does belong to Florida. It's just, I think this could be the series that kind of prepares them and molds them. And they're going to need that, JB, because if they do make it out this series, and we assume they do, they're going to face either Toronto or Tampa.
Yeah.
Like, that's not easy.
No, it's not easy, not at all.
Yeah, and that's funny enough. That's more like a conference finals caliber matchup when you really break it down between that, and you got to face them in round two. That is not something to scoff at, because you're either getting the back-to-back defending champs or a Maple Leafs team that would knock out the back-to-back defending champs. So that's two amazing teams right there. So that wraps up half the East. We're going to continue obviously to the other portion of the Eastern Conference, and I say we start out with the so far the lone series in the East that's out to a 2-0 lead. And we talk about the Carolina Hurricanes and the Boston Bruins, JB. We kind of spoke about before the show that some of these series is going to be kind of quick about. I think this is one of those series, JB. I think the biggest question going into this was, can Carolina overcome their playoff demons? Because of their last three playoff runs, 2019, 2020, 2021, they were knocked out by the Bruins in two of those three playoff runs. The other one was Tampa, right? And I think the big question was, can Carolina, is that going to play to them mentally? JB, I think it's very obvious in this series that Carolina does not fear Boston like they did in the previous years.
Oh no, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't. I think that this is a very, very good Carolina team. They could have easily, in any other year, won the President's Trophy. So I don't think that there's any reason for them to fear Boston. Boston's not the same team, and one thing that I thought going to the series was with Frederick Anderson being healthy. I thought Boston would be able to get one of the first two games, but even though they won game one with their backup goalie and they won game two with their third string goalie, it seems to me that Carolina still has a goaltending edge, and they're not even playing with their number one goalie. Um, Boston has just struggled all year against them. This is like what they played 5 games, and I think they've only scored 4 goals
Oh, that
in
is.
5 games. Like, I mean, like, Carolina has just been playing very good defense, and Carolina has a lot of offensive talent. They can score goals, and yeah, I think this is going to end up being a short series. Game three in Boston, that's going to be the Bruins' last stand. If they lose that game, then we might be seeing some brooms.
I definitely, I'm with you on that. And you talk about the Bruins' lack of goal scoring, just their defense. This is really a fall off for the Boston Bruins, who for so many years, like, they pride themselves on being that strong goaltending and defensive team. That's how they got to the Stanley Cup final back in 2019 when they ultimately lost to the Blues in 7 games there. And we're just seeing, I think, I don't want to call it a collapse, but just an outclassing of what Carolina's skill talent has done. 5 goals in each game, like, that is a pure level of consistency. You're going to get 5 goals consistently against a team in a series. You're going to come out of that series as the victor, and you're probably going to come out early. I think, like you said, game 3 between those teams on Friday. I think the one shot that they have here. So I believe it's been Linus Ullmark so far in the series for Boston. Do you take the chance and switch over to Swayman, JB?
I think that you have to. I think that you have to. I think that even though I don't think Allmark has played horribly, I don't think a lot of the goals he's given up have been like softies. But I
Right.
think that maybe just to give your team a boost, you go with Swayman the next game, see what he does. But this is just laughable to me, Jurg, because like a lot of fans really disliked Tuukka Rask. Tuukka Rask was a very good goaltender from, yeah, he didn't win the Stanley Cup for them, but he was a really, really, really good goalie for them. And I mean, like, if Tuukka Rask is healthy, I think they're able to win one of these first few games, actually. But
Yeah,
they don't
I
have him
think
anymore.
yeah, no, you bring up an amazing point right there. Tuukka Rask, he did end up rejoining the team this season, but ultimately he succumbed to injuries and chose to retire because his body just couldn't do it anymore. And I think, you mentioned it, JB. I think this is going to be the series that makes Boston Bruins fans, look back and think of Rask more fondly, because like you bring up the point. He was the backup when they won the Stanley Cup back in 2011, but then he was the backstop that led them to the Cup final in 2013 and the Cup final in 2019. And that 2019 Cup run, had they finished off St. Louis, there was conversation of Ross being the Conn Smythe winner, which for those listening to us that are new to hockey or don't know everything, that is the playoff MVP. This guy could have been the playoff MVP a couple of years ago and now retired. I think you bring up the biggest point. I think the ultimate edge that Carolina has here, even aside from the skill talent, because I think Boston Boston matches up with a lot of people skill wise, but just that defense and goaltending. I think Carolina's defensive core has been underrated for a couple of years. They just never had the goaltending, and now apparently they have 3 goalies that could get you a game in the playoffs. And
Yes.
it's absolutely insane to see it. And like you mentioned, Frederik Andersen, a lot of people were concerned coming in. Really, it almost feels like this is a blessing for Carolina because now Frederik Andersen is going to be healthy. You assume for the playoffs going past this, assume some of these series can go deep. Carolina finishes early, more rest time for him. Like things are playing in the Hurricanes' favor here, which it kind of needs to, considering what what the other matchup is that they could potentially face one of these teams. JB, no, ladies and gentlemen, these teams are still not playing. Despite the fact of how deep that first game went into overtime between them. But the Pittsburgh Penguins and the New York Rangers have game 2 tonight as we are recording this. Pittsburgh ended up winning a triple overtime classic in game 1 off of the game-winning goal by Evgeny Malkin. He's back, ladies and gentlemen. Never really left, just kind of slowed down for a while, but he is back. JB, like that game was just insane, man. And I think I'll let you start with this, JB, but there was something interesting, I think, to take note for this series as it goes. But I want to get your thoughts on that game 1 first between the Rangers and Pens.
Oh man, it was a good game. It seemed like at times that the Rangers were going to be able to put distance, but every time they scored, Pittsburgh always answered them back. Now, I do think that that was a horrendous call at the end of the game. I don't think that that was goaltender interference, and I think that if that goal counts, they probably win the game 4-3. But unfortunately, the refs, the people who were reviewing it saw something differently than I did, but it was a really good game, and Pittsburgh showed that even though they're a bit older, they still have experience, and they have experience that the Rangers don't necessarily have.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very big point you bring up there because honestly, aside from Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad, a lot of the players on this Rangers team, it's relatively new territory for them, and Artem Panarin as well. Like a lot of these guys, it's new territory for so many of them. When it comes to the main core of this team, you think of Adam Fox. Who leads that defensive core now? This is his first playoffs, if I'm not mistaken. You look at that forward core. Aside from the guys I mentioned, also Barclay Goodrow, like a lot of that team this is new for them, to experience playoff hockey, and I think that it's a bit of a shock for some of these guys to deal with. And I think the biggest blessing for the Rangers ultimately here, JB, is Gerard Gallant. Like that dude. Wow, I was talking about a podcast once when the Rangers hired him. That may have been like the hiring of the offseason for any team because like that acquisition like completely changed things for the Rangers.
Oh, he's got a great, and I'm a Dallas Stars fan. I was actually hoping that even after their success they had in the bubble, I was hoping that they were going to hire him. He's a great offensive coach. Like I mean, like his teams can score, and actually one of the things that's like hurt him in places like when he was in Florida, he didn't have the defense, but he had a solid defense and goaltending in Vegas, and he has a pretty nice young defensive core in the Rangers, and he also has a very nice young goalie as well. But like he was the hire of the offseason. He should win, in my opinion. He should win Coach of the Year this year. You look at what they were last year to what they are this year, it's night and day.
Yeah,
If you would have told me at the beginning of the year that this team was essentially going to finish like what I think they finished maybe third in the East overall,
yeah, I
I would
think
have
I think so. Yeah,
I would have told you I thought they were crazy. No, I thought they were a playoff team, but
right.
like for them to have like 100, like how many points did they have this year? Like 110,
Uh,
111?
yeah, just second behind Carolina in the division. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's insane. That's a very very big jump in point percentage from last year. So yeah, yeah. Um, I do think that it's gonna be now. I think we're gonna learn a lot tonight in this game because a lot of times teams when they lose a 3 overtime game, the next game is a bit of a letdown for them. If they can somehow win this game, I think they'll be okay for the series.
Yeah, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how this young Rangers team responds. I think one big thing for them that could help them is, as we just spoke about, Gerard Gallant and also Igor Shesterkin being like the likely Vezina Trophy winner this season and a hard candidate. Like having that guy in net to try to help you out to get out to avoid a series hole is big. I think for me personally, JB, I think my biggest takeaway from that game 1. And this has kind of been the story the last couple playoff exits for Pittsburgh. We didn't mention it with the Capitals, but it's worth noting like the Capitals haven't won a playoff series ever since they last won the Cup in 2018. Very close to a similar story. I think Pittsburgh has only won one playoff series since their last Cup victory back in 2017. And and a big thing with a lot of their playoff defeats recently has just been the fact that, and especially because it's come against the Islanders, that the other team just manhandles them and just out physicals them. And in the regular season, I actually went to one of the games between the two teams, JB. Like, you could tell the Rangers felt that they were just more physically imposing than the Pens. but it didn't bother Pittsburgh in that first game to me. I think they responded better to it than they did in their last couple playoff appearances. And I think for me, it's going to be interesting to see if the series does end up going like close to the distance, like 6 or 7, if it'll wear down Pittsburgh. But for them to not look, down and out early when the Rangers are going at them, I think that's going to be the biggest thing. Because if Pittsburgh can overcome that mentally, I think that gives them a better chance than most gave them credit for going into the series to potentially pull it out. Because I think for the most part, everyone would have thought that Pittsburgh would end up being, or that the Rangers would win the series. So
Well, and I thought last year the biggest thing was just that Tristan Jari was horrible last year, and I see he's injured right now, and Casey DeSmith are injured. So Louis Domingue, like the veteran backup who was the third string goalie, who has spent so much time in the AHL. He's going to get to start game 2, and he was huge for them. He played very well for them in overtime.
yeah, yeah, he did. And if they can, it's going to be hard to on a consistent basis. But if they can just match Shesterkin in moments, I think that gives the Pens the biggest chance of being able to to win the series ultimately. But yeah, so that wraps up the Eastern Conference side of things. But au contraire, Monfrere, we are done, ladies and gentlemen. Lest you think I'm letting hockey talk, end so quickly over here. We're going to shift over to the West real quick. And JB, I'm going to start with what I think is probably going to end up being the quickest series of the bunch here, especially from what we saw in Game 1. But the Colorado Avalanche and Nashville Predators. I mean, my God, it was a slaughter in that Game 1, and Dave Riddick just it was rough. It was rough. JB, it all depends if UC Saros can come back. But even if he does return, can you see the series going past 5? Like, I don't know if Nashville
No,
can.
I can't. And even if UC Saros comes back, like how healthy is he going to be? Because I think that if you're UC Saros and you're looking at what happened to them in game 1, you're like, man, I need to maybe come back. Maybe I can't wait to be like 90%. I have to come back when I'm 70%. And you know, um, it was just a mauling, man. Like Colorado, you could just tell. Like you just look at people before the game sometimes they came ready, and I think that they came into the game knowing that we're better than this team. We're better than this team. They're not playing their starting goalie, and we're gonna make their backup goalies look horrible, and they did that. So, um, if UC Saros was healthy, because me and you have both seen it where goalie gets hot and he steals a series.
Yeah.
I could see if UC Saros was like completely healthy and we knew he was going to start game 2, could I see a path of them winning a couple of games? Yeah, I could, but like no, I can't. I actually think this might end up being a sweep.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you whatsoever. I'm kind of on the same mindset. I would have given the Preds definitely a game or two if Saros was in, because a lot of people, they're quick to forget he gave the Carolina Hurricanes a bit of a scare in round 1 last season. When it was the different divisions. So Saros is definitely, like, he's done well before. I just think, and it is confirmed that he was not going to be in for the first 2 games. So really the big thing will be game 3, which will be sometime this weekend for the Preds and Avalanche series. If he can return for game 3, we'll see if that can make a difference. But I just don't really see a lot from the series. And I think for Colorado, I think the motivation to finally get over the hump, 3 straight years they've exited in the second round, I think that team is hungry to advance further. And I think Nashville, they just end up being a stepping stone to them this season. Kind of like St. Louis was last season in the 2021 playoffs. The Avs, I want to say the Avs swept them last year as well.
Oh, they
So
did. They swept them 4-0. Yeah, they
yeah,
swept them
and,
4-0.
and dominantly as well, just like the Avs had in game 1. So Colorado just knows how, in the early round to get it done. And hey, I already mentioned them. Let's go to a series that it's looking like it could be a real slobber knocker between these two teams. The St. Louis Blues and the Minnesota Wild. JV, goal scoring is, clearly the difference in this series, but I don't think it ended up being the difference that a lot of people figured it would off the jump. So game 1, the St. Louis Blues end up winning that 5-0. Game 2, the Wild win 6-2. Funny enough, both off of hat tricks. David Perron with a hat trick in game 1 for the Blues. Kirill Kaprizov, God, that kid's a superstar. He's a superstar potential player in game 2. This series, JV, it feels like it's going to be a series of runs, and whichever team just gets the momentum in it goes. What do you think from the first 2 games you saw? What do you think is going to be like the X factor or decider between who wins this series?
I just think it's gonna come down to which goalie can make the timely save here and there. Husso was brilliant in game 1, and I think that they made the right call making him their goaltender because Bennington has really fallen off since he won the cup. And nobody's really talking about them. Bennington has been really bad for them. I mean, not bad as in he doesn't deserve to be in the NHL, but he's been bad as in like I'm not a number 1 starter. I'm a backup.
Right.
That's it. So, and Fleury, even though he's had playoff success, he's also had his playoff meltdowns. Like I look at last year, the game 3 against Montreal, when he misplays the puck and the game ends up going to overtime. That ended up being the turning point in the series, and they lose to Montreal. So I just think it's going to come down to what goalie can step up, and I lean actually Minnesota in the series. My prediction was Minnesota in 7, so I lean Minnesota in this series.
Right. And honestly, I don't blame you. I think the thing is with both these teams, really, it is going to come down to the goaltending because I think blue line wise, both teams are deep. You got Spurgeon, Brodin, Dumba on one side, on the other side, Krug and Falk, and Colton Parayko. In terms of St. Louis, I think the forward core you got both teams have like star caliber snipers with Tarasenko versus Kaprizov. You have good depth surrounding both of them, guys who have stepped up this season with big years, like Goudreau on Minnesota has become a really reliable middle six forward when he was really more of like an AHL player before this season for the most part. And for St. Louis, Jordan Kyrou has really had a breakout campaign as well. So I think both teams have seen a lot of it for themselves where they've had guys step up in moments this season. And I think ultimately it's going to come down to between Husso and Fleury who's going to make that final like that final stand for them. And it could really go either way because this is the funny thing about the playoffs, JB, is that yes, playoff experience matters, but you said it before when it came to the Predators series with Saros, like a goalie can go on a run, and Jordan Binnington was the guy who went on that run a couple of years back. Ville Husso could have a run like that in him as well. Like it's just like you just never know what could happen.
Oh yeah, and kudos to the Minnesota Wild front office. I think that they kind of knew that what they had in the team. They knew that unfortunately Cam Talbot, um, he's not the guy. I think that they knew that they were not going to win a playoff series with Cam Talbot as their goalie. So they went out and they got Fleury, which I thought Toronto should have done. I think Toronto is eventually going to regret not like going in and trying to get Fleury.
Yeah, I definitely don't blame you. And if both those series end up going the distance, I think it's going to be really interesting to see who ends up winning the series. And we could very well be pointing to the Marc-Andre Fleury difference as the reason why one team, if the Wild do advance and Toronto doesn't ultimately at the end of both those series. So funny enough, you mentioned it during your the convo there, JB, about Fleury's misplay. You know, let's go to the series that we've seen a misplay from a goalie so far in it, and that is the Edmonton Oilers and the LA Kings. The Kings surprised a lot of people this season. I think, Anaheim, San Jose, and Los Angeles, it was kind of between the three California teams of like, okay, well, one of you has to be good this season. Who's it actually going to be? Is it going to be the team that has all that salary tied to it in San Jose? Or was it going to be one of the two teams that were going through transitions this season? Anaheim and LA were, both wonders to start the first half of the season. Anaheim ended up falling off a little bit because they didn't have enough veteran talent, I feel, and just those young guys, they were good, but they haven't done it yet. And I think LA, it was the consistency of having Drew Doughty for a lot of the season, which his absence early in the season, early in the series, is going to affect them. But they had Andrei Kopitar. They signed Philippe Danault, which, God, that signing looks outstanding. So far.
Now it does. Now it does. Yeah, because at the time I was like, wow, 6 years, 33 million. Are they smoking crack?
Now, a lot
Yeah,
of people were
yeah,
confused.
yeah, yeah. No, he's played a good role for them. Yeah, yeah. No, this series is interesting because yeah, like I think when you look at the numbers, I think that LA kind of overperformed what they should have done this year.
Mhm.
I don't think because they almost had 100 points. I think they had 99 points, which if you would have told me that beginning of the year that they have 99 points, I would have said
Wouldn't have
okay,
believed you.
I'll take that bet. So and I would have lost my money, but like no, the Kings have surprised. That was a really big game. What I just Edmonton should win this series. I'm just gonna put this out here. Edmonton should win the series, but I just worry they're so bad when McDavid and Draisaitl and Kane aren't out there. They're such a bad team. They're like they give like the new name to like a one line team.
Right.
So and Mike Smith, my God, like that's malpractice right there. You have these young studs. You signed Evander Kane. Why would you have why would you have Mike Smith and what's the other guy's
Miko
name? Nico
Koskinen.
Koskinen. Why would you have those two as your goaltenders? Mike Smith, he's 39. Like he should be retired. I don't know why he keeps playing. I thought he was cooked when Colorado like ran him off a few years ago in 2019 when the Flames finished first
Right.
in the West, and like Colorado made him look horrible, and I
Yeah.
was like, he has to be done. And then he turns around and he signs with another team. I'm like, I'm always amazed at Mike Smith and how he's had this longevity. If I'm not mistaken, Mike Smith played with the Dallas, because I'm a Dallas Stars fan. He at one point in the early 2000s was a Dallas Star.
Yeah, I think so. Well, here's the funny part, really, about it, JB, because I was hearing another podcast talk about this. Mike Smith really parlayed that random run by the Coyotes in, I think it was the 2012 playoffs when they reached the conference finals before they lost to the
Yes,
Kings. He parlayed that for another decade of his career
I know he
because,
has. He really has. I think that when general managers they're like, oh, we need a goalie, and they're like, how about Mike Smith? Oh, he's. But remember 2012, he went toe to toe with Jonathan Quick, but the team couldn't score. I think that's what people are, and that's just one playoff run that happened one time a decade ago.
yeah, yeah. And here's the funny part about that. I think the stat is he's only won like one playoff game since that 2012 run.
Yeah, game one against the Avalanche in 2019, and then they lost four in a row after that.
Yep, and then last year they ended up getting swept by Winnipeg. So just rough times for for Mike Smith recently, but played a lot better in game two. So we kind of talked about it. The faux pas by him giving the LA Kings that go ahead goal in game one, and then game two he gets the 30 save shutout against the LA Kings. I think the big thing this was the big thing for me in game one. Philippe Danault, because we talked about the difference he made for the team for this season. He was out there like almost every single time the McDavid and Draisaitl were out there. And you have a guy like Philip Danault who played such a critical role in Montreal's run to the Cinderella run to the Cup final last season. Like he's just a straight up defender. Like that's why LA signed him for moments like this if they could make the playoffs. Like it's one of those like moves I kind of find funny looking back on. They were not a playoff team before the season, but they made a playoff team type move to get Philippe Danault. And him and Andrzej Kopitar are just an amazing shutdown duo in terms of center. And that's the way that they're going to have to try to play it. Obviously, it did not work in game two, but to your point, JB, I think this will be the ultimate factor in the series. Of the 6 goals scored by Edmonton in game two, only one of them did not include either Draisaitl, McDavid, or Evander Kane in terms of either the goal scorer or the assists. So it's going to be interesting to see if the rest of the team around those guys, and Evander Kane, by the way, like say what everyone will about in terms of like what happens with him off the ice, but like on the ice, this was an amazing signing for the Edmonton Oilers because he just
Oh
fits
yeah.
on that team.
Oh no, he does. He does. He's a hey, yeah. Off the ice, he's a knucklehead, but on the ice, he's a really good player.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, man. And I think just at the end of the day, that's going to be the key factor. But so far, Edmonton got, I think, I would argue best case scenario because even though I'm with you, I expected Edmonton to win the series. I think in about 6 games, but I did not expect them to go up 2-0 just because I feel like the LA Kings are the kind of team that they're just going to take one of those games from you because they still have like the guys who have been there and done that on the squad before. But I think this was the best case scenario for Edmonton. And here's the thing: even though they ended up losing that game one, they still got the 3 goals ultimately against LA. And I think as long as they could be consistent in this series in terms of their goal scoring capabilities, I think that'll be big for Edmonton going forward with their chances to win this series and if they could potentially move on. And if they do end up moving on, JB, we talked about some of the potential playoff matchups that we could get so far. We could see, Florida versus Tampa again in the second round, or it could be Florida, Toronto. We could see Carolina, New York in round two. This to me is if we get the dream matchup in the second round, oh boy, this will be literally a bloodbath on the ice. But the Edmonton Oilers and LA Kings, of course, they will face the winner. The winner of that series will face the winner of the Flames and Stars series. And if we end up getting the Battle of Alberta, JB, oh dear God, it's going to be one of the best playoff series in recent memory on paper, I feel, because just those two teams have a legitimate vitriol for each other if their regular season battles the last couple of years don't show you enough. But let's get to just the Flames. Let's not look at too much. Let's look at the Flames in and of themselves. They won a very close game one against the Dallas Stars, 1-0. Not exactly what you expect from a team that had like 300-point players on their roster, essentially. Johnny Gaudreau, Matthew Tkachuk, and Elias Lindholm. He either just barely got to 100 or just below 100, but he's essentially a 100-point player this season. The scoring has just been off the charts for Calgary this season. They took that next step as a team. Jacob Markstrom as a Vezina candidate. Like I feel like we've called half these goalies Vezina candidates, but it's legitimate because like having a good goalie is more apparent now than ever in this league, and that's what Calgary has. Dallas, they're just not the same team what they were back in the bubble. Injuries and COVID to me outdid them last year, but even like this season, I feel like they were kind of more lucky than anything to end up making the
Yo,
playoffs.
yeah, they were. They were very fortunate, and I'm a fan. And it pains me to see what this team has become, and I blame a lot of it on coaching. I think Rick Bowness is just not really a good coach, and I think that the offensive system sucks. I think this team has far too much offensive talent to be struggling to score, and I don't think Bonus puts his teams in the best position to succeed. The goaltending's not bad. I was really impressed with Ottinger because you never know what to expect from a goalie in his first playoff experience. I think he held up pretty good, but yeah, I have a hard time seeing Dallas win 4 of the next 6 games because they can't score. They're a one line team. They have Robertson, Rupe Hintz, and Pavelski, and Jamie Benn has just continued to fall off, and Tyler Sagan, he started to play better after recovering from that hip surgery. But yeah, I think Calgary should win the series. And my original prediction, and I'm a Stars fan, I said Calgary in 5.
Oh yeah, no, I don't blame you whatsoever because I think ultimately just for Dallas, it's the fact that they don't have the firepower to compete. Granted, Ottinger, that kid deserves a lot of credit, man. Like I think the rash of young goalies we've gotten the last couple of seasons, and there have been some good ones. Ottinger, like he's kind of been a low key name amongst all of them because I think of Askarov from the Predators, Carter Hart of the Flyers, of course, was like the biggest one. Shesterkin with New York, we're seeing his performance, but Hunter, he's got some talent with him, and it's just like if that team was just playing at a higher level, I could maybe see them making a series. But I'm with you. I think this could potentially be the other series that ends up in a sweep. I will say for Dallas, if there's one thing they could like take with them is the fact that he had such a great first playoff game, and that they just needed a goal. But Markstrom is going to do. He's going to have a game like that. So I think the ultimate indicator will be what happens tonight. Ultimately, I think Dallas can take some solace, but I'm with you for the most part. It's going to end up being the Calgary Flames winning this series and moving on. So that completes our playoff wrap up of just the first round. But like I said, we just a little bit more here. So, we've broken it down. We've kind of talked about what the second round matchups could be, but let's skip straight to it, JB. Let's skip around here. What to you are uh, in your opinion, are the Eastern and Western Conference final matchups that you expect to see? And if you want to, if you want, your Stanley Cup final matchup as of this point.
Ooh, this is a tough one. So I would say out west, I'm going Colorado versus Calgary. Those are my Western Conference finalists, and then in the East, I'm gonna say Carolina and Tampa Bay.
Mm, yeah, I don't blame you whatsoever. I definitely don't blame you because I think those are a lot of the favorites that a lot of people have. In the East, I'm with you. I think New York is just a little bit too new to this for a lot of their roster. I think they'll beat Pittsburgh, but I think Carolina would defeat them. So I have Carolina in my conference finals along with the Tampa Bay Lightning as well because man, I picked them to repeat last year. I personally, JB, I want to see a three-peat. I think the other sports, thanks NBA, but I think a lot of people have been turned off by the fact that LeBron making 8 straight finals, the Warriors being a dynasty. It's turned some people off to the idea of teams winning multiple in a row. But I love the idea of a great team solidifying themselves as a dynasty, and I would love if the Tampa Bay Lightning can just solidify themselves this upcoming season as well. I would just love to see it. So I'm going to go with Tampa Bay and Carolina as well. And in the West, like I got to run with Colorado versus Calgary. I think Edmonton, man, if they just had a better goaltending situation, I would actually probably give them a chance against Calgary. But I think ultimately Mike Smith versus Jacob Markstrom this season, I think Markstrom will make the difference there. But I think first off, I have McDavid in the second round, so that's a plus considering what the last couple playoff runs for Edmonton have ended with. So I have Calgary versus Colorado there because I think Colorado, I think this is their chance to get past that second round hump. And man, what a team they'll end up facing if they can make it that far, man. Calgary, Colorado, I think would be just such a crazy Western Conference Finals, and then Tampa Bay, Carolina, the rematch of a second round last season. Whew, that one would be good as well. JB, I think we are in store for what could be one of the most highly entertaining playoffs in a while. And I try to say that every year because, I always want hockey to one up itself. But I really do think on paper this year, this could end up being just a dynamic playoffs for the NHL as a whole.
Oh, I think so too. I think we're in for a treat. And this is my favorite time. I know we're not going to talk about it, but like I just love this time of year. You have basketball and you have ice hockey going on. So I flip between basketball playoffs and ice hockey playoffs. I love this time of year. This is like my Christmas actually for me. It's a 2 month Christmas for me.
Hey, man, that's the beauty of the playoffs. Like That's just how it is in sports, and especially when it comes to hockey, it takes it to another level, and that was amazing. But speaking of best time of years, JB, and that concludes our hockey talk for this episode of the show. Got it to the max. It's been too long since we went too in depth here, and we're coming back strong, especially when the playoffs are coming around. But JB, amazing to talk playoffs with you, obviously, but you're not going away. Let me not make it sound like you are going away for the episode, because you are staying, because we're going to transition here. You talked about the playoffs being the best time of the year for the NBA and the NHL. But when it comes to the NFL, yes, the playoffs are entertaining. The Super Bowl is amazing. But a lot of people would argue when it comes to the football side of things that really what could be the most entertaining time of the year ends up being the NFL draft. This is also where Dame re-enters the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, Dame, sorry to leave you out there for a good while, but hockey guys got a hockey.
All good, all good. You guys did an amazing job.
Appreciate
Whatever
it.
gets views,
Yeah, and by the way, Chris and Dame are slowly becoming like bigger hockey fans. So I'm very happy and prideful of that.
I
But
watched
let's
that Rangers game instead of the Warriors game.
Hey, there we freaking go. Love to hear it. I love to hear it. But let's move on to the main event of this episode, and that is talking about the NFL draft. The NFL draft, of course, was last week. Round one was crazy, to say the very least. The rest of the draft playing out. Guys got taken earlier than expected. Wild trades happened. Guys fell. We're going to get into all that. Of course, we're going to finish with our winners and losers. But before we really get into that, what we're actually going to do, we're going to answer a couple of just key questions / thoughts to think about. Amazing phrase there. But just a couple things that we personally have noted down to take from the draft, particularly relating to round one, but a little bit diving into the deeper round. So, Dame, I'm going to throw the first question that we have on docket to you in regards to the NFL draft. We saw a lot of trades in the top half of the draft. The Saints traded up, the Titans traded up, the Eagles traded up. I'm definitely the Lions had traded up even late in the draft. The Jets and Jags had traded back up. Just so many teams made moves when it came to the draft. Of all the trades that we saw in the first round, which it was like 8 or 9, which one was the most surprising to you? That why did this team make this move? Who they ended up selecting, etc.
Yeah, a lot of analysts expected this to be like a crazy draft, and honestly, to me, it lived up to expectations because it was so crazy after the 10 pick. I know when we did our mock, Chris said the draft started at every other pick, but the draft really started at 10, in my opinion, and that's when it went crazy. You didn't know where players were going to go, you didn't know what teams were going to trade up, and all these trade ups were good for the teams. But the one that really surprised me, based off their selection, was the New Orleans Saints, who traded up to 11 to take Chris Olave. I'm not going. I'm not going to talk bad about the actual pick because I think Chris Olave is going to have an amazing NFL career. But for them to trade next year's first with the Eagles, and then to get one of the Eagles picks, like a month ago in that trade, and then move more assets to move from that pick all the way up to 11 just to take another wide receiver when you have a big hole at quarterback. And I get it, this quarterback class isn't stacked, but why use all your assets to not only gain a first round pick this year, but also lose your first round pick next year and move all the way up to 11? So at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense to me. I get it if it was for a quarterback and they were just in love with Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis, and that would have just made sense to me because you're getting a guy who you believe is going to be a franchise quarterback for the next 10 to 15 years. But no, they use all their assets up for a guy who you're hoping is going to be your number 2 receiver behind Michael Thomas, and you're just going to hope that Jameis Winston is your quarterback of the future, I guess, because next year's quarterback class, which is a lot better, you're not going to have a first-round pick or any other assets to really move up for it. So I don't know what they were thinking about it, but to me, that was the most surprising move based on their selection.
Do you think Dame, because he ended up being the third receiver taken, because the Falcons took Drake London and because the Jets got Garrett Wilson? Do you think maybe that because obviously these trades are kind of negotiated beforehand, they don't just happen on the spot at the moment. Do you think that the Saints were biding their time, and once they saw the first two guys went, they were like, we don't want to risk it, let's just go for it?
Yeah, but it just go back to the part where I'm like, you need a quarterback to be successful.
Right.
No matter, you could draft 5 All-Pro receivers, but if you don't have a quarterback that can get them the ball, it's not going to really matter who you have on the outside, And I get it if they had maybe a developmental quarterback and try to give him as many weapons as possible, but Jameis Winston is what he is. He's reached a ceiling. He's not going to get much better than he is now. Obviously, maybe if you add a couple weapons, like his numbers get a little better. But he is what he is as a quarterback. You know what you have. So to me, it was just a really confusing move based on all the assets they had to move up to
Hmm.
get this guy.
Yeah, because they had made the multiple trades beforehand.
Like for
Uh,
example, like just an example, like if it was the Texans doing it, I would get it because you have Davis Mills as your quarterback. You just want to see what you have. It's a young guy that you don't know what you have yet, and he just has a bunch of potential. And you should add whatever you can around him to really maximize what you're able to see in him. But with the Saints, you already have a veteran quarterback. You know what you have, and in a division with Tom Brady, I just don't know if that's going to be enough.
fair, but definitely fair in the breakdown there. JB, for your money, what was the most shocking trade that you saw in the first
Um,
round?
the Titans, and I understand it was a business decision, but the Titans trading AJ Brown. I was really shocked because you normally don't see that happen with a player who only has finished his third year. I understand that they didn't want to pay him, but I don't know what the Titans are doing really per se. I do know what they're doing. They're trying to cut costs, and I know that they got Traylon Brown. Is that his name? Or
Burks, Traylon Burks.
Traylon Burks, and that's going to save them money. But I just think that you made your football team worse. They went 13-3 last year, or 13-4, had the number one seed in the AFC, and I think that the roster I'm looking at now with with what they've done, I think that they're going to struggle to win 10 games next year. I really do. I didn't like them getting rid of AJ Brown. I think that you deal with that at another moment. I understand why they did it, but I just don't like it.
Right, right. It was definitely interesting. Well, with wide receivers getting paid this offseason and, AJ Brown, DK Metcalf. We actually talked about on the show a couple weeks back, me and Chris, we talked about DK Metcalf and AJ Brown, actually, funny enough, the two of them and what could happen. And of course, weeks later, Debo Samuel comes up in the news. So all three of those guys were watched at draft night. And clearly the NFC West teams are like, yeah, we want to keep our receivers. And Tennessee's like, yeah, we don't want to pay this guy. So ultimately they make that deal. First, I'd love to hear that they could get worse. That's the energy I want to hear when it comes to Tennessee Titans. So I love that, JB. But ultimately, I think it will be interesting to see if I think now this puts the pressure on Traylon Burks because really I can't think of another receiving option on that team right now. So
No, they
it's
don't because they got rid of Julio Jones as well too, and like yeah, I just think that their team has gotten worse. And I mean, are they doing this to like basically sandbag Ryan Tannehill on purpose so they can get out of his contract?
oh man,
Is there some sabotage going on there in the front office?
ooh, we got some saboteurs. I like to hear it. Love to hear it. I love the drama. So my pick for shocking trade really, this deals with because I with all of our deals it really comes down to one side. So this is my side. The Detroit Lions and the Vikings made trades. The Lions traded up to number 12 from 32 to pick up Jameson Williams. Now, slam dunk move by Lions. I'm not even going to address them because they freaking stole the show. That was an amazing pick. What the hell is Minnesota doing? Trading down 20. First off, let me go in order. You make a trade with a divisional rival. Okay, I know that kind of happens more recently in years, but for the most part, it's typically with mid to late round picks that may or may not bite you back later. Okay, but you're making a first round pick trade with a division rival. Okay, kind of risky. You still say in the second. All right, not too bad. It's a 20 pick differential, and Minnesota essentially got nothing back. And Minnesota also had to send another pick back in the deal when it came to that. It was like it was the 32. They got the second back. I want to say they also got a third, but they also had to send their own third. Like how on earth do you have a 20 pick difference and you don't get more back? I've seen teams. Dame literally talked about it. Teams have given up future first round picks for less jumps in trades. How do you not get at least another future pick? Maybe not future first. Okay, fine, but a future second next year at least could have also helped sweeten it up. Like I don't understand how Minnesota to me, they botched that deal. And I'm going to get into them more, moments from now and what they did overall with the draft. I know they did fine with the draft, but I just think there were some perplexing moves there for Minnesota. And I know they technically did get better after the draft, but to me, it was just the fact that like they got better, but they don't feel like they're going to compete like fully next season. Like I think they're going to be a team once again that's kind of outside, could be outside looking in. And yeah, I know they lost all those one possession games last year, but like maybe this is why you end up losing those games, because you just don't make the right decisions in the offseason as an organization. That's just my thing with it. So in terms of talking about shocking, we talked about the shocking trades that happened. Let's talk about some of the shocking drop offs that happen here, guys. And let's just go straight to it when it comes to the quarterbacks. This was, kind of like Dame said before, this wasn't necessarily a, bona fide quarterback class like in previous years, but a lot of people before the draft ended up, trying to hype it up, saying could see 3 quarterbacks go in the first round, maybe could somehow see 4 quarterbacks. I never really bought into that. I don't think any of us did. I think at most what any of us would have seen would be 2 quarterbacks going in this draft, no more. And well, I guess technically less happened because Kenny Pickett ended up being the only quarterback that went in the first round of this draft at 20th overall to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Desmond Ridder would go 74 to Atlanta. Tennessee Titans would get, funny enough, Malik Willis at 86. Matt Corral would go to Carolina at 94. Bailey Zappi, funny enough. I know mentioning him is kind of weird, but it's just because he was actually drafted before Sam Howell by New England. And then you have Sam Howell, who went to Washington at 144. Dame, I'm going to start this off with you again. Just what was your reaction when it came to seeing the quarterbacks, take the falls that they did in this draft? Because we all know that this wasn't a strong class on paper, but just at the end of the day, I don't think a lot of people would have expected them to all fall to 3rd round and below.
Nah, yeah, I definitely didn't expect the drop off that did happen. So that really surprised me how little stupid teams there were, because I think taking any quarterback in the first round is an incredible reach and pretty stupid in my opinion. Hence the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I was definitely surprised that Malik Willis did fall that far. I definitely didn't think he deserved to be a first round quarterback, but a guy like that with that much potential, I definitely think he at least should have been a 2nd round pick just because of all the physical tools he does have. And I get it. There's a lot of mechanical things and just be able to read the field and stuff that needs to be worked on. But that's something that can be worked on. The physical traits that he does have is something that no other quarterback in this class did have. And when you're obviously when you're drafting quarterback in this class, he's not going to be your day one starter unless you obviously have Mitch Trubisky as your quarterback. But overall, you weren't going to draft a quarterback in this class to be your day one starter. So you're going to draft him to be a project and kind of develop it and see what you have and see if you could reach his full potential and see what you could develop out of him. So the guy that had the most potential, in my opinion, was definitely Malik Willis. So it's kind of surprising to me that not only did he fall to the 3rd round, which basically every single team in the NFL passed him at once, twice, or even sometimes 3 times. So yeah, and then obviously being picked behind Desmond Riddler was surprising as well.
Yeah, Desmond Ridder definitely going to Atlanta kind of shocked me because I believe the Falcons, they traded up in the 2nd round after they had already made a 2nd round pick. So I actually thought that they were going to go for Malik Willis a lot earlier than ultimately the team ended up going with him. It definitely surprised me as well. I just think overall, kind of like you said, I think the thing that surprised us really the most, and I think JB can attest to this, is the fact that the quarterback is the position that most teams will look to overdraft in the league. And this is really the first time in a long time that I think teams they just decided not to take that risk when it came to this quarterback class. And I think that's just something to look at as intriguing for the most part. I'm not really surprised to see Corral necessarily fall, because I think Corral really did more so project out to be a 3rd round guy compared to the rest of them. I think Ritter's late jump didn't shock me if he would have gone in the 2nd round, but I think at the end of the day, for the most part, the quarterbacks going, it made sense here. I just think now the interesting thing to me, and I'm going to throw it over to you, JB, with this. Pickett is not the only guy who gets taken in the 1st round here. How much pressure is that extra put on Pickett now because he's the only quarterback taken in the first year? He has to
Uh,
he has to perform.
well, yeah, well, but you know what? I'm buying this. He's going to start this year. I think that Mitch Trubisky is going to start this year. I mean, I think he's at least going to start the first 6, 7 games of the year. Um, but I think that what would happen, I just think that I think we were all in agreement about this. I think that this was kind of a really uninspiring quarterback class. Um, and that's why you saw only one guy go in the first round. You had no guy go in the second round. I think it was a very uninspiring quarterback class. And I do think Pickett's under pressure, but I don't think he's under pressure at the moment. I think he's under pressure 3 or 4 years from now.
Hmm.
But at the moment, right? No, I don't think so. I think that now if he starts from day one, that tells me everything I need to know about Mitch Trubisky. I was never a huge Mitch Trubisky fan, but
Right.
I think that he should be able to beat Kenny Pickett out to be the starter. But if he's not, I don't know what to say. And I'm kind of shocked that I expected for Pickett to be drafted before Willis, but like Dame said, if you're looking at talent and like ceiling of a player, I think that Malik Willis has a higher ceiling than any other quarterback that was drafted in this round. I think he was punished because he went to a smaller school. I think he went to Liberty. He went to Liberty, and the competition he went against wasn't as good as someone like a Kenny Pickett or a Riddler. And I think he was actually punished for going to Liberty. But um, it's gonna be interesting. I think that Willis will not play this year, but I think that he might be the starter next year in Atlanta.
Well, no, Tennessee.
I mean
What do you mean Right.
Tennessee. I'm confusing him and Riddler. And I
No,
don't
no,
think I
I
don't.
don't blame you.
Yeah. I don't think Riddler is gonna play either this year as well. I think Riddler and Willis are both gonna be learning on the sideline. Now, it'd be interesting to see if let's say Tennessee's in the playoffs and they decide to give Malik Willis a chance like the Chiefs did with Patrick Mahomes in Week 17
Right.
that
Right.
year. So.
And this ultimately could end up being the case, I think, for a lot of these guys is just at the very end of the season. I could see, especially because Atlanta, I think like their fate is sealed. They're not going to be a good team this year. So I think, we could definitely see, and I think we kind of have to see Desmond Ritter get a couple of starts at the very end of the season, just because if Atlanta ends up finishing with a top 3, top 5 pick, like this is the call for Ritter. It's like, okay, let's see what you got here, and if maybe he shows something, maybe you could convince yourself that he could be the guy, and you could trade down next season if you don't want to take one of the quarterbacks, or put yourself in a position to take one of the top quarterbacks next season if Desmond Ritter just isn't the guy. And I think it's going to be interesting. And I think Willis and Corral are kind of in the similar position there, where depending on those teams' fates at the end of the season, they could definitely see time. But let's go straight to the next one, JB, because I know who your guy is, and you want to just expand a little bit more about him in particular. Your biggest slip of the draft was?
Oh, it was definitely Malik Willis. I mean, I'm absolutely shocked that he went from being a lot of mocks had him the first quarterback to go, and some of them. I didn't think he was going to be the first to go, but some did. And for him to go from potentially a first round pick to being drafted all the way in the third round, that's just shocking to me. It's shocking to me. I don't know what happened. I don't know whether he had some bad interviews or I personally, my theory is I think he was punished because he went to a smaller school, and I think that if you go to a smaller school and you're a quarterback, or you're one of these skill position players, I think you're punished for not going against top notch competition. And I think that if you're from the SEC, you're overvalued because you're going against top competition every week.
Right. Right. And Willis, it's funny because he ended up transferring from Auburn to go to Liberty because he really wanted like the opportunity to end up becoming his, because Bo Nix, I believe, was there at the time at Auburn. So it's certainly interesting. And kind of like you just mentioned, it could definitely be a scenario where if Tennessee does end up being a playoff team again this season and they have their playoff spot clinched by the final week, I mean, maybe they keep in Tannehill, just to maybe go for positioning. Maybe there's a more favorable matchup. But it's very certain a possibility that we could see a 1 or 2 game sample by Willis at the end of the season just to see what he has. Because I think Tennessee, like it was kind of also weird for them to take a quarterback in the third round. You wouldn't have thought that they would have gone QB there.
Yeah, I agree. I concur.
Yeah, yeah. I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. For myself personally, my slip of the draft was Bernhard Raymond. He went in the first round in our mock. He's gone in the first round in a lot of mocks I saw going into it. The fact that he goes to the third round, 77th overall to the Colts, definitely surprised me that he fell that far. I wasn't surprised because I think a lot of people, at least on like PFF and other sites, were kept labeling him as an offensive tackle. I didn't necessarily see him as definitively a tackle. A lot of the places I saw said he would probably be more suited to end up becoming a guard, maybe right tackle at most. So that's not like that didn't surprise me if maybe that was some team's concerns. But the fact that he fell from the first to the third, and the Colts, man, like again, more detail later on. But the fact that that they had 0 first round picks and they're able to get a guy like a Bernhard Raymond in this draft with the third round, like just outstanding selection there by Indianapolis to make that deal. Like like Indianapolis has consistently had a really great O-line for the last couple of years. Now they've lost like a piece or two recently, especially with the left tackle spot, being vacay recently, and they still need to like definitively fill it. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, like Raymond, he's going to be plugged into most likely somewhere on the right side of the line because Quinn Nelson, of course, being left guard, like he could have a chance to make an impact on this team. That is for certain. So he's definitely my slip of the draft, but I definitely think he could make an impact early on. Dame, who ended up being your slip of the draft?
My slip of the draft was George Pickens, the 6'5" wide receiver out of Georgia. I was extremely high on this guy. Maybe it's just my personal bias because I like big receivers over smaller receivers, but I just thought the physical traits that this guy had is 6'5", and he could jump and catch the ball at the highest point. He could help a lot of these young receivers, or young quarterbacks out in this league. And no, I didn't think he was better than Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Olave, or Jameson Williams. But then right after that, with the group of Burks, Dotson, and Watson, I think he was better than those next three. And I get it why they went in the spots they did go to. But I definitely think Pickens should have been at the end of the first round or very early in the second round. He went, I think, at the end of the second round. But I thought he was supposed to go in the end of the first, early second. Kind of like what I expected him to go was kind of like the T Higgins, where he went first pick in the second round to the Bengals a couple years ago. I thought that's what's gonna happen because I think they're very similar players, big guys that you could just throw it up to them, they're gonna go get it. And even with the ball in their hands, they can make a lot of plays. But it was very surprising to see. But the Steelers are just one thing I'll give the Steelers is they know how to draft and develop wide receivers, and that's what they're gonna do with George Pickens. I think they lost Juju obviously, and now having George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, and Chase Claypool, I think that's one hell of a trio. I think George Pickens, they're gonna develop him into the best wide receiver he could possibly be.
Right, and also he's not the only mid late round selection they make because they also ended up getting Calvin Austin out of Memphis, who I think could be absolutely dynamite when it comes to the return game for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So those are all our like specific picks we made. I'm just going to note real quick because I think these were the two biggest names that ended up falling in the draft. It was George Karlaftis, who ended up being taken at number 30 by the Kansas City Chiefs, and I think the biggest fall of them all from first round to I want to say he went in the third. Nakobe Dean, going funny enough actually to the Philadelphia Eagles, which I think some people end up mocking him to, just didn't up, it didn't end up going in the first round per se. I think those were the two biggest falls. I think outside of the three, and I think the two biggest names. Dame, like, do you have any comments about like those two guys falling?
I think, well, we're going to get into this, but I think George Karlaftis to the Chiefs was an absolute amazing pick. I don't relatively think he was it was kind of like a steal because I wasn't that high on him. And I think that's around the area where I probably would have drafted him if I was a team. But as for Nakobe Dean, I have no idea what happened to him because, in my opinion, he was the best middle linebacker in the entire draft. So for him to fall not only out of the first round, but out of the second round as well, was extremely surprising to me. And I have no idea why, but I think he's going to be an absolute beast in that Philadelphia Eagles defense, especially adding Jordan Davis up front too. I think he's put in a great situation.
Right, and really for both those guys, like that could be one of the good things that when it comes to falling in drafts is that even though you fall, obviously it sucks because you get less money right off the bat, but you could end up being in a better situation where you could see yourself thrive. Any JB, like just kind of same thing to you. Any comments about like seeing those two guys fall?
I mean, I it happens every year. At this point, I'm kind of numb. I'm kind of numb about it. But yeah, I was really shocked by Nakobe Dean falling as well too.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't blame you. I want to say I could be wrong, but was there something recently about an injury he had suffered? I think that may have like played a part as to why he could have potentially fallen.
Yeah, there was a few reports that he had a bunch of injuries, but I mean,
Yeah, and I also think his size was kind of one that kind of made people like make him fall a bit because he's only 5'11", so he's not a big linebacker as well.
Right. Right. Definitely both could have played an option. I just think overall, I think he's definitely for everybody the drop off in the draft class just because going from first to third rounder like that, that's not something you see too often. And technically speaking, we kind of had two of those when it comes to this draft class with Willis and Nakobe Dean. So kind of crazy when you really think about it. But speaking of which, we move on. We're going to continue to talk about the draft, and it is time for the usual winners and losers. Myself, Dame, and JB all have two winners and two losers a pop in regards to who we could be, who are going to claim here. So let's just start off with the winners real quick. JB, give us your first winner of this draft class.
Um, yeah, I hate to say this because I detest them as a football team, but I think the Eagles did a very good job of drafting. I mean, getting the Kobe Dean, Jordan Howard, trading for AJ Brown. I think that they, in my personal opinion, they get an A+ for this draft.
Wow, yeah, some really good selections there when you think about. And the funny part is really they end up trading two of those picks. Um, they end up trading up for Jordan Davis. They end up trading away like one of the picks in the Saints deal, and then they trade the other one for AJ Brown. Like really, I think the interesting thing about the Eagles, and I think this is where you're going with it, JB, is the fact that they don't get the grade because they used all their picks. In terms of drafting directly, but the way that they asset manage those selections into new players on the team, I think they kind of showed like how it's done when you have all those picks.
Yeah, Howie Roseman's a great GM. He knows how to maneuver up and down the draft during the off season, during the season, during the actual draft. Like he's a wizard.
Yeah, absolutely. Dane, you speak about it there. Of course, I'm sure we're all in agreement with the Eagles being a winner. Who do you have as one of your winners of this draft class?
I could be biased here, and I think the clear and obvious team is the Jets, but I'm gonna just pick someone different just for the show. It was between two teams, and I think I'm gonna go with the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs were one of the biggest winners, if not the biggest winner in this entire draft. They had two picks in the first round, second round, and third round, and they used some of their draft capital to move up and get a defensive player with their first pick. They moved up to 21 to get Trent McDuffie, who I think was the third best corner in the entire draft, and obviously the Chiefs defense needs a lot of help. We also talked about how they needed wide receiver help. So I personally thought they maybe were moving up for a wide receiver when I saw they traded up. But then getting Trent McDuffie, I'm like, all right, like that's a really good pick. Like you need to set that cornerback position right because they lost their number one corner to the Niners, I think, this offseason.
Yeah,
And obviously you lost Tyrann Matthew, so that secondary is really depleted. And then with their 30th overall pick, they went George Karlaftis. Like, obviously, I'm not as high in him as other guys are, but at that pick, I think it's an outstanding pick. He has a lot of potential. He's a big guy, bull rusher that you could just put on the edge next to Chris Jones, and you get a lot of pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And like I mentioned, like they still needed that wide receiver help. Maybe it wasn't a priority for them because that defense was. And I get it. You have Patrick Mahomes, like he can make the wide receivers look a lot better than I guess like a Chris Jones can on the defense or a defensive coordinator can with that defense, where he doesn't have any talent. So going McDuffie and Karlaftis first two picks, I was okay with. But then I was like, they still do need an added wide receiver at some point in the draft. And adding Sky Moore at 54, I think was an absolute steal. He's super electric. He can go open by himself. And I think putting him in that kind of Chiefs offense where Patrick Mahomes just give him the ball and Sky Moore can go and do what he does with the ball in space, I think is an absolute steal. And then obviously they still added another safety. Like I said, obviously he's not as good as Tyrann Matthew, but adding another guy to that depleted secondary and Brian Cook, who I think was one of the best safeties in draft, was great. And just to fill it out with one more pick that I think was another steal is Kennard, the guard out of Kentucky. This
yeah.
is a guy who I thought was going to be a second round pick, at worst a third round pick, but they got him in the fifth round. This is the same thing they did last year where they got Trey Smith, another guard, in the sixth round where he was supposed to be a top 2 round or top 3 round pick. So the Chiefs just from top to bottom, they filled every single possible need they needed. They moved up and down the draft as well to get the guys that they wanted, and I think they filled every hole they needed in the priority that they needed.
It's funny, JB, like a team like the Chiefs, a lot of people were trying to talk about how they were maybe going to fall off in the AFC West next season. But this draft class, it's kind of got some people thinking like, oh, is Kansas City, did they kind of just do a good job here, like kind of reloading their roster a little bit to, stay well within the convo next season?
Oh, I think that they did. I think that they actually were a big winner too of the draft. I mean, yeah, they're going to be fine. And like, I think that them getting Sky Moore, like Dame just mentioned, I think that that was a good step. He's not going to replace Tyreek Hill this year, but maybe a few years down the line, he can be that receiver, that number one guy that you need. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he kind of showed a little bit in college. He had some really deep catches and can make some plays. I think Sky Moore was you could argue in terms of value, like he's going to end up being one of the most valuable selections in this draft, without a doubt. So in regards to my winner, so my first winner I'm going to go with is the Baltimore Ravens.
That was the guy. That was the other team I was debating with. But yeah.
Yeah, no, and Dame, I honestly can't blame you because I think when you look at the Baltimore Ravens, first off, you start with Kyle Hamilton with your first round pick. You don't need to trade. Like, it's funny, all those trades were happening around Baltimore, and they were just like, nah, we're good because none of these teams are trading for our guy. They go with Kyle Hamilton to help out the defensive back crew, which was just amazing. Then here's the wild part to me. I didn't even mention this when it came to all the crazy trades earlier. They traded AJ Brown. Oh no, not AJ Brown. My bad. Or Hollywood Brown. All the guys named Brown being traded at receiver in this draft, except for Antonio, but he's out the league. They trade Hollywood Brown to the Arizona Cardinals for their first. Then they trade down 2 spots with Buffalo, and then they get Tyler Linderbaum with their other first. You talk about solidifying your offensive line for a decade to come in the interior. That was just a phenomenal selection by the Baltimore Ravens, who ever since the departure of Marshall Yanda, have needed to re-upgrade that interior offensive line. And of course, Orlando Brown leaving last year, they had to turn to the Chiefs because he just didn't want to be there anymore because he wanted to be left tackle to get that money. Just an amazing job that the organization has done to help out the offensive line. And like Linderbaum, just an amazing addition to the interior. Cannot complain about. They made what could potentially be like a great pick in a couple of years' time with David Ojabo. Like we talked about, who was going to end up picking him, and it ends up him going into the second round, being selected by the Ravens. Like he's a guy, like he should have been a first round pick. The injury is the only reason he's not. He sits out most likely his whole rookie season. He comes in and he could just make a difference on that defensive line. Like that could be a big thing, helping out the pass rush. They got the kid Jones out of UConn, who like that kid in the interior could be a force. He could be a steady rock on that team for a decade. They got Falele to just help with more depth in the trenches. And they also got, I think this was one of my corners that I looked at in the draft process as like, he's going to be 3rd, 4th, 5th round pick, and he could be a steal. Like if you develop him, Jalen Armour Davis out of Alabama. If that kid develops in that deep secondary, which no pressure on him because that secondary, like there's already talent there. If he can develop, he becomes a starter. He could make a couple plays. Oh my God, this could be one of the best overall draft classes from this draft. Like a couple years down the line, and that's absolutely outstanding. So just a great job by Baltimore. JB, I'm going to throw it back to you. Who was your second winner of the teams that had some really good drafts for 2022?
The Jets. The Jets did a great job.
There you go, Dame. He said it for you.
Yeah, getting Gardner and Wilson in the top 10, and then getting Jermaine Johnson at number 26. I think the Jets did a really good job. They got a third down back. I mean, I think one of the biggest issues with the Jets last year, I think that they were devoid of offensive talent. Now you've gotten the offensive talent for Zach Wilson. It's all going to be about, can he perform now?
Definitely fair there. And they also made a depth offensive line pick, which I was a fan of with Mitchell, I believe, out of Lafayette is
Mm-hmm.
where he went. And that was a very good pick as well. I think like the Jets, this was really a draft where they had to hit on the picks they had. And I think we can all agree saying like they hit on these picks. Like this is JB, this is the Dame, of course, has experienced this, but like from you and me perspective, not being Jets fans, like this is the first time in a while that we can universally say the Jets had an outstanding draft. Great for the Jets. Dame, you don't have to worry about bias here, man. You got 2 other people agreeing with you, so there is no pressure on
Yeah,
who
yeah.
you got to pick here.
You guys kind of took all my winners from the Eagles to the Jets to the Ravens, and obviously I said Chiefs. So I'm just horseback off the Jets here, and I think just going off every single pick, I think they got the best corner in the draft, and that was an extremely big need is that secondary. Then they got obviously they needed to get Garrett Wilson help with one of these first round picks, no matter which one it was, whether it was 4 or 10, whether it was offensive line or receiver. And then they went and got Garrett Wilson, who I thought was the best wide receiver in the draft. And then they traded up to go get Jermaine Johnson when he was slipping. I saw an interview with Robert Saleh saying that if Atlanta went with Garrett Wilson, that they were probably going to take Jermaine Johnson at 10. And personally, I would have hated that because I know a lot of analysts are high on Jermaine Johnson, but I just wasn't. I think he's a good player, and I think where they got him at is where he should have been picked at. But having to pick him at 10, I think would have been an extreme reach. And going double defense and not getting Zach Wilson to help with one of your first round picks, I think would have been a huge mistake. So I'm very happy the way it played out. And just to see Jermaine Johnson fall, and then just to trade up and get him and still have one of your second round picks, I think was great. And then obviously with the high second round pick, they went up and traded for the best running back in the draft in Breece Hall. And something that Breece Hall adds to his offense, I think, is that explosiveness. They have a couple good pieces now, obviously with Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, Michael Carter. They added a whole new tight end room from 3 new guys. But one thing I think this offense was missing was that guy that can go out and get you a 60-yard touchdown. And I think Brees Hall is that guy at 210. He's a big guy, but he runs 4.39, which is extremely fast. He's explosive. He makes everybody miss. So I think that element of his game is going to be extremely valuable to his offense because, yeah, getting 10, 12 yards is great here and there, but to be able to really stretch a defense out, you need that guy who can go out and hand him the ball or give him the ball in space and can go get you a touchdown for 67 yards away, you know? So, yeah, just to Jets, Joe Douglas, I think he did an amazing job this draft from moving up and down in the draft and really filling every single need Jets possibly needed.
Yeah, good, just great overall. Can't sing the praises enough. And he missed out on it this week. You know, Chris, I'm sure he's going to try to bring it up next week because he would want to be in on the fun. But yeah, the Jets were just amazing with the draft. So my second and final winner that I'm going to say and go with is the Indianapolis Colts. Like I kind of mentioned earlier with the Bernhard Raymond pick, but just the fact that they didn't have a first here and they just filled out this roster really well, I think was big. They got Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati with one of their second round picks. I think was just a absolute amazing pick there. Pierce had a big final year in Cincinnati, was a big target for Desmond Ridder in regards to, performing last season, had a career high in yards and touchdowns. I think he could help out that team. Then they got Jelani Woods, who he's a bit of a project, but if they develop him, they could, help him perfect his craft. My God, that kid is just going to be a physical freak. He's going to be one of these mutants that we have at the tight end position. He could be like a Darren Waller-esque type guy potentially at best if they could really work with him. He's definitely going to be like the guy that you have to wait a little bit. You have to wait more than the others in terms of the impact that he could end up really making on this team when he reaches it. I already said about Bernhard Raymond before, but he just solidifies the offensive line and what they could do. He's just another big weapon there to just add to the depth of that team in the trenches. And then to me, the last main pick that they made that I really like was Nick Cross. Just getting him in the mid rounds, I think was a great pick. Helped solidify the defensive back crew, which lost some pieces in the offseason, mainly Rocky Sin at corner, but they got Gilly Lock, so they just had to add safety. I think Cross was an amazing selection there. Just four great picks. Again, if you can have a good draft without using a first round pick, which some teams they would get multiple firsts and they still can't do anything with it. Cue Minnesota Vikings that one draft when they had 3 firsts and did nothing with all 3 of them. That's a great draft. And I think the Indianapolis Colts just really hit it out the park in terms of their draft selections in this specific draft. Now, we move on to the losers. There is one team in particular which I'm going to be interested to see if they end up a loser here. And because some people would consider them a winner, and they may or may not pop up. We will see. But Dame, I'm going to go to you with the losers first. Who was your first loser of the 2022 NFL Draft Weekend?
My biggest loser, and I think it's not even close, is the New England Patriots.
Right.
I have absolutely no idea what they were doing. First, they traded back with the Chiefs. And I get it, it's hard to trade one in division and then in conference, especially with a rival like the Chiefs. But the draft pick trade was it was even, so I get it. But then you trade back and you got Cole Strange. And I don't know if you guys saw the video of Sean McVay and the Rams GM was
Oh, I did.
They
talking
were
about that
laughing.
pick.
They
Oh
were
my God,
laughing.
that was hilarious because this guy obviously wasn't ranked anywhere near the first round or second round, and the Patriots went out and just yeah, fuck it, let's pick him 29th overall, and who cares when there's so many other players at every single position available. So that pick right there was just an awful start for them. And then with their second round pick, they went with Tyquan Thornton, another wide receiver, when there was so many other wide receivers on the board that are so much better. I had to look up where this guy went to school,
I think he
what he
went to
did
Baylor,
or
didn't
anything.
he? Didn't he go
Yeah,
to
I
Baylor?
think so. Yeah. But at the time, I just had no idea who it was because there was these other great names still on the board for them. So that didn't make sense to me. And just then in the 4th round, they went over to QB out of Kentucky. You didn't just spend a first-round pick last year on Mac Jones, and he just led you to the playoffs, and you're hoping to move forward him as your franchise quarterback. So you use a 4th-round pick, which a lot of good players can come from the 4th round. So you decide to use that pick on a guy who you hope doesn't play any snaps for you as a starter in NFL because you're hoping that your first-round pick from last year is your franchise quarterback for the next 10 to 15 years. So I'm happy to say that the Patriots are absolutely clear-cut number 1 losers in this draft to me.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. They definitely made perplexing picks, and Dame being a Jets fan, he and Chris is gonna definitely love it. Just the Patriots. It really does feel like Bill Belichick just doesn't he doesn't understand it anymore, man. It's wild to see. It just is. So I'm gonna go to my first loser here really fast, and I kind of alluded to it when I talked about my shocking trade. I got to run with the Minnesota Vikings here. Now again, I like the first two selections they made. They got Lewis Cine out of Georgia, and they got Andrew Booth Jr. out of Clemson. I did like those two picks. Again, my only hang up is just the fact that if they had stayed at their pick, why not go with Kyle Hamilton? Like that's my number one thing. It's just the trade that they make falling down 20 spots and not going with just the top player at the position you end up taking if you just stayed and you end up making the deal. I would be okay with it if they got more back, but again, I don't think they got enough back there. Again, I think Scene and Booth are just they're fine picks, but just it really baffling moves. I think in terms of what Minnesota just ended up deciding to do, and heck, even you could have again, all due respect to Lewisine, but maybe you could have gone corner first with that pick because I don't know. Again, I like Andrew Jr., but there were still at least one or two more guys that went before him at corner who were drafted higher. So it's perplexing moves by the Vikings overall. And then I didn't necessarily hate their picks after. I think Ingram and Asamoah are fine picks, but I did see a lot of people just consensusly saying that they were a little bit too high. So I think that's the ultimate reason for me why I'm just like, I got to have him as a loser. JB, your first loser of the draft weekend.
Okay, so I'm not gonna do a team. I'm gonna do a player.
Okay.
So my first loser of the draft was actually, whew, I felt bad for him. Justin Fields
Yeah.
was my big loser of the draft. I don't know what the hell the Bears are doing. They don't really have any weapons for him to throw to this year because they lost Allen Robinson. So I was really, really surprised that they didn't use one of their first uh, few picks on a receiver. I don't know who he's going to throw the ball to this year. I really don't. I mean, they have a tight end.
Uh, yeah, oh yeah, they could. Yeah, that funny enough, that was actually a problem. Like, wasn't it 2 years ago? They had like 9 tight ends on the roster, and they had to cut that from preseason to regular season. It's just a wild thing. No, I definitely don't blame you. I think you could actually argue for the Bears. They made a couple good selections because they got the corner Gordon, and they also got Jaquan Brisker. Like, I think those selections in and of themselves are fine. Just like kind of like you mentioned, like Justin Fields has no one to throw to. I think you could actually this is the case where it's like I think the Bears you could say were mid, but the loser is Justin Fields.
Fields, yes, yeah. No, I liked what they were doing because their secondary was atrocious last year. But I mean, like they should have gotten him some more weapons, and they didn't for whatever reason. So
Right, especially because a lot of receivers, like kind of, I don't want to say fell, but like a lot of, to me, good valued mid round receivers ended up going. And I think like they could have maybe used like another one of their selections on one of those guys, especially because also good offensive linemen were taken later in the draft. So I don't know. Yeah, I definitely don't blame your thought process there at all, JP. Dame, I wish I knew what team this was because I feel like I want to save Dame for last here, but we'll just go with Dame next because he got us started just on fire here with the losers. Dame, who is your final loser for the
It was kind of
2022?
tough for me to find this second loser because like I said, I just thought the Patriots were just clear cut loser,
Right.
and I didn't really see any other clear cut losers in this draft. I had just had a horrible draft, so I'm just gonna, I guess, reach here. I'm gonna go with the Jaguars solely based on their number one pick. I just didn't see it in Trayvon Walker. I didn't see number one pick potential. I didn't even see top five pick potential. I thought they could obviously should have went with Aiden Hutchinson. I thought Kayvon Thibodeau was better. I thought even if you're not gonna go with one of those two edge rushers who I think are definitely better than Trayvon Walker, I definitely think they should have went with an offensive lineman to go help their young quarterback. And I don't even think they use any of their first top four picks on any offense. When you see I'm not saying you gotta follow what other teams are doing, but when you see what Joe Douglas is doing with the Jets and the help he's going to get Zach Wilson, like I don't understand how you don't use any of your top four picks on offense to try to help Trevor Lawrence. Like, I know you're gonna probably they're gonna try to justify paying Christian Kirk $18 million a year, but that's not the answer. Like even if Christian Kirk was good, like you need a lot more on that offense from the offensive line to the wide receivers to really help Trevor Lawrence be successful. So not only did I think they went with the third best edge rusher, I think they probably should have went offense to help Trevor Lawrence, and then just the rest of the draft just not going offense and not giving any real elite help, any of their elite picks, top picks of the rounds to use to help Trevor Lawrence is kind of mind-boggling to me.
Definitely interesting there. I will say the one pick that they made in terms of like being offensively related was taking Fortner, the center out of Kentucky. So I guess some offensive line help there for Trevor Lawrence, but was definitely interesting in terms of what the Jags' plan was. But hey, it's also Trent Baalke as the GM thing. You got to remember that.
No.
So for myself, my second loser here, and I hate that I'm calling this team a loser because I actually don't necessarily hate either. I don't hate that these two guys got picked where they did, but Jahan Dotson and the kid Mathis for the Washington Commanders in the second round. This is my thing ultimately when it came to both selections. Jahan Dotson, I think, is going to be fine as a player, right? But I think now the pressure is going to be put on him by a lot of people just because of where he was selected. And I really think this was a Dan Snyder pick, that they saw all the receivers going. They probably one of the receivers they wanted was gone. And they were just like, you know what, let's just still take a receiver. Let's just take Jahan Dotson. And I think it's unfair for him that he has to now deal with that. And I hope he succeeds. Hope the kid does well. But just, man, it's I wasn't the biggest fan of that pick per se, especially because I forget what the situation was, but like maybe they could have traded back again because I still think they definitely need to add to help out with corner or safety. And this is where I get to the next pick. And Federi Mathis, all due respect to him, again, happy the kid got drafted where he did, but I don't think they have to go defensive line in the second round per se. And again, I know the second round is really where a lot of the corners or safeties ended up being taken in this draft, so I can kind of understand that mindset. But the very next pick was Jaquan Brisker. The pick after that was Alontae Taylor. Just finishing out the second round in terms of corners taken. Cam Taylor-Britt was taken out of Nebraska. Brian Cook for the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, there were still a couple guys that could have been taken there. So I just wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of what they did with those selections at the end of the day. Personally, for me, I think they could have been a lot more efficient. And just Washington, man, they had so much promise going into last season. And I know that they traded for Carson Wentz. He is a quarterback upgrade, but I just don't see that team going far next season. JB, you are going to finish us off here. This is the grand finale selection of our class, of our episode here. Who was your final loser for the 2022 NFL
this
draft
was tough
weekend?
because I don't think many teams had a bad draft. No, I'll just say this. I would say the Seattle Seahawks, because I think that they actually should have picked Malik Willis. They need a quarterback, and I think that they're not going to be so bad next year where they're going to be able to get a really good solid quarterback. So I think that they made a mistake by not grabbing Malik Willis in the second or third round.
Wow, interesting. And it's kind of funny because really when you look at it, like they made the right first round pick with getting Charles Cross, and I actually kind of like some of the depth picks they made, but
Me too.
but
I,
but
but
you think they should have gone quarterback?
I think they should have gone quarterback, because I'm not sure if they're going to be so bad next year where they'll be able to get one of the top quarterbacks. Because next year's quarterback class is a hell of a lot better than this one is.
Oh yeah,
It's night and day.
for certain, and this could be one of those things. And I think really Seattle, out of all the teams, funny enough, like they probably should have been the team to take a risk on one of these QBs because they're just like that. They don't have a quarterback on the roster right now. You want to have for the long term, like Geno Smith and Drew Lock. Just it's not ideal.
Don't say anything about Geno Smith Dame. Maybe we'll get PTSD about that. So.
Apologies, Dame, and apologies, Chris, when he has to listen back to this. But yeah, that. What a weekend the NFL draft was, and I just got to say, like overall, it was quite the experience to say the least. And speaking of experiences, that's what this episode I think was to the beautiful listening and viewing audience. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us for this week's episode of the Somewhat Sports Podcast. It was electric. Of course, it always sucks when one of the usual three of us is gone, but I think Chris will be proud of this. JB, thank you so much, brother, for coming on. We really do I really do appreciate you coming on. This man's a warrior. He literally got 24 hours notice on this, and he was just like, yes, I'm with it. Let's go. So JB, I appreciate you so much. So kind of just let the people know anything you want them to let them know, man, because we appreciate you coming on.
Oh man, nothing. You can find me on Facebook as Jamie Bailey. You can find me on Facebook. That's it.
Yeah, and he pops up on podcasts from time to time as well. I've worked with him before. Like, do not be surprised. He shares a link on a pod he's on. He does some good work whenever he's a guest. He's a good guest, especially when it comes to talking football. This guy knows his stuff. Dame, I gotta say, I think we killed it this week. Don't you?
Absolutely, we always do. Especially without Chris. That's the best. That's when you do our best work.
Oh my goodness, Chris, we love you, we miss you. But again, you have to do, you have to serve the people this week. You have to do your due diligence, and we hope we made you proud. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, you can follow us at SomeWhatSports. We keep it going with the daily polls there in regards to the NBA and the NHL playoffs. Great interaction. We appreciate everyone that votes on those polls. We're definitely going to post come the conference finals of the NBA and what our predictions for those series will be. Maybe a hockey post or two once the playoffs continue to get going here from myself. Like we're just going to be as active as we can be, and of course, episodes will be coming out. So we're trying to save it more for kind of like special episodes. But definitely, follow us on Spotify as well. The podcast is available on Spotify. So far, the draft is up there. Again, if you want to re-listen to the draft and see what our mindset was and see, what kind of misses that we had, you can definitely listen in there. But thank you all so much for joining us this week. And of course, as always, you will hear from all of us next week as well. Thank you, everyone, and take care.